Hello, everyone. Welcome to See the Invisible, Living with an Invisible or Rare Disease. My name is Rhonda Franny Jefferson, and thank you so much for taking the time to listen today. I know that there are a lot of different podcasts out there, and I thank you for giving me this opportunity to share my experiences and stories. If you're new here, to tell you a little bit about the podcast, I want to show that others who have an invisible or rare illness, that they are not alone and that we do have a voice. I cover topics about what I've either experienced or read about and share some of my opinions and how the topics relate to me and probably some others out there too. In most podcasts, I reference a few different articles and I add some of my personal stories. While articles will play a part in this episode, the podcast will really rely a little more heavily on my own observations and experiences. I won't be relying on any particular article, but I will be talking about different things that I've observed while reading different articles. Now, before I really start discussing the topic for today, I am in no way a medical, insurance, or legal expert. If you do have any questions in those areas, please be sure that you do contact a specialist in that field. I will discuss topics or articles that I have found on publicly accessible means. Any opinion discussed is based on my experiences and my understanding of that particular topic and how it pertains to my life with my illness. It is not meant to and should not be used as any medical advice. So, some of you may be looking at the title of this particular episode, Making the Visible Seen. You might be asking, isn't the visible already seen? It is, but some people can't or won't see it. Kind of think of it as selective hearing. When I ask my husband to change a light bulb that I can't reach, I might have to ask him 12 times to do it. I tell him dinner is ready or that the cookies that I baked are fresh out of the oven and he's there in a heartbeat. The longer that we are together, I would like to get him to the point that he understands that changing the light bulb is important and he needs to listen to me regarding to that also. It's not just what he sees as beneficial, such as filling his tummy with cookies, that is important. I guess in a way, thinking of it in terms as a light bulb, nobody can see the light, so it's up to me to point him in that direction. Much like if people don't see what we feel, we may need to point them in the right direction. So what made me really start to focus on the aspect of how invisible or visible is an illness was a TikTok that was shared by a high school friend of mine. She's gone into the healthcare industry and is pretty successful from what I've seen. She actually treated me once when we were both still pretty young. As I've mentioned before, I live in a rural area, so I'm bound to be seen or treated by people that I know. But this TikTok was something that hit home to me. It showed a woman who, if you're familiar with this diagnosis, obviously has severe lymphedema. Simply put, lymphedema is fluid retention because the lymphatic system does not work properly. There is a lot more about it, but for simplicity's sake, people who have this have very swollen limbs, and fluid can even gather in the stomach area. So this TikTok showed a video of this woman, and there was a man who was watching the video making commentary and making fun of her. It was disgusting. Now, most of the women on my mother's side of the family did have this in some form, whether it was severe or mild. My mother had it. My aunt, who just passed away this month, had it. And it was a struggle that they and myself have had, our whole lives. So some people do have lymphedema in just one limb. In those cases, someone who is observing that person may, obviously think or understand that there is a medical condition causing it, since it's just in the one limb. However, just from my observations, I really, really feel for someone who has it in just the one limb, because what it can do is make you feel off balanced, whether it's one leg that is very, very swollen and, you know, the other side is, say, average, then that can make it really difficult with your center of gravity, as well as even finding clothes to fit. That may seem like a small detail, but when you need a boost of self-confidence, that's, you know, a real downer to not be able to, you know, just be able to find something to wear. And I did actually happen to see from this high school friend, she sent me some pictures of women who did have lymphedema in one limb, and they were celebrating their illness. I don't mean celebrating like having a party, but they were not afraid to show that this is what my leg looks like. So I honestly wish that I had that confidence at times. Now, as far as myself and my family, we have had it in all of our limbs, and that can really make us just look obese. It doesn't help that, you know, when we're at the doctor and being weighed and the BMI is calculated, no one looks at our legs or our arms and says, okay, you're carrying 30 pounds in each leg. And I have carried that much. I was hospitalized once with my legs securely wrapped because they don't make stockings large enough for myself. So, you know, that's really, to me, I'm just in awe of that, in the fact that there are stockings made for people with lymphedema, but they don't come in my size. And there are not adjustments that can be made to make them fit comfortably. So, you know, again, just another aside that, you know, that's not available to some people with this illness. But when I did leave the hospital, I was 156 pounds lighter just by receiving Lasix, which is a fluid pill, by IV, and having my legs wrapped. I could move so much more freely, but once I got home and I was not receiving that constant care of Lasix by IV, of having my legs wrapped, then that 156 pounds came back pretty quick. But I have had other treatment, and things are much better with my legs. Also, to look at it too, if you're carrying an extra 30 pounds of fluid approximately on each limb, exercising and even just, you know, limited or regular mobility is difficult. So we can't really be as active in order to go to the gym or exercise to try to keep our normal weight down. So, you know, as I just said, I do have this illness, but due to some treatment, it is primarily invisible in terms of what most people think of. I cover a lot with my clothes, but still people will judge me. I have to special order clothes that will fit my legs, and so it really does look invisible. But I also don't wear shorts, really short sleeve shirts, because that's me trying to cover it. And, you know, in some ways I really am thinking, should I feel like I have to cover myself? But on the other hand, I don't want to subject, you know, say if my kids are with me, I don't want people to be making fun of me while in front of my kids. So there's just a whole lot going on with that particular illness. But, you know, I do also have an invisible autoinflammatory disease, and that is invisible completely for the most part. We'll get into some other ideas later. So there are so many days that I just want to start yelling at people to not judge me or to judge anyone unless they've been in that person's shoes. So just don't make fun or judge anyone. So I did have a chat conversation with that high school friend. I'm going to give her the benefit of the doubt that she may have been stressed or maybe not understood this particular stereotypes that the lymphedema has. But it truly did make me question what is visible and invisible. Is something visible to one person and not another? I think the answer to that or these questions may lie in the individual and their experiences, as well as what the specific condition is. But here are some of my thoughts on judgment and how visible and invisible may be seen or not seen by others. So I know that in this past year plus, it's been tough on everyone. But when we already have a certain health regimen that we have to follow every day just to get through, we have to face certain physical and mental challenges all the time. And the responsibility of what we need to do each day to protect ourselves and our loved ones can become really, really heavy on us. We all need to support each other and let people know that we are a strong and supportive community. But I know that can be hard at times, especially if you yourself are struggling. I know that I just said that we are strong and supportive, but when you have a rare disease, by definition, you usually do not have a friend or support group close by that really covers that illness. Online support groups can help, so please reach out to one if you need someone who is experiencing something like you are experiencing. I know that for myself, when I've had a hard or frustrating doctor's appointment, which the frustration is normally due to insurance, or if I've just had a hard day physically or mentally, I can vent on some of these support groups pages and just know that the people in there can understand what I've been through. And, at times I've been able to offer advice about my experiences, especially to those who have just been diagnosed. Now, when someone with an invisible disease steps out of their house and goes to the store, or goes to work, or decides to take a walk around a park, they may or may not face judgmental stares, such as are they moving fast enough? Are they parked in a handicap spot and someone doesn't think they should be? And many of us feel that we can't say something about it to those that are judging us. Speaking only for myself, I've felt that at times, and I was embarrassed to explain. When I'm feeling at my strongest emotionally and mentally, I know and tell myself that I know I need to use the handicap tag, for instance, that if people will judge me, that's on them, not me. I don't need to explain it to myself then. But like I said, it's when I'm at my strongest. These days aren't every day. When I think about being able to speak up for myself, to not let someone dictate how I feel that day, sometimes it just takes me stumbling a little, having some trouble getting out of the car or not being able to keep up with others. And then I feel like I'm not going to make it through that day. And if I run into someone who seems to judge me for any of these above reasons, I just kind of absorb that judgment and let it take me over instead of me taking it over. I'm trying to take some of that negative energy and turn it into something productive. Sometimes I take my energy and I just bake a lot. The problem with that is twofold. One is that everybody eats all of the cookies or cupcakes so quickly. These sweet, sugary items are not good for my inflammation, even though they taste really good. But also, standing up or trying to use my hands is excruciating, and it takes a toll on me. It can sometimes take me multiple days to make a batch of cookies because I do these things in stages, and I have to. So, as I've been trying to bake to release some nervous and negative energy, I'm also pushing myself too far. So, I've needed to learn my limits. And right now, I'm pretty much at my limits. So, what do our limits look like to others? Do others even see that we have limits? What do they think when they see us? I want to tell two different stories that look at situations in different ways. So many years ago, I'm in college and I need to drive down to the local CVS. The parking lot there was extremely tight. There were lanes that went just one way, and because the lanes were so narrow, there was no way that two cars could safely pass each other. So I pulled into the parking lot. I'm driving around, and I noticed that it is much fuller than I've ever seen. So I'm driving through the lanes, and I found that the only parking spot was a handicap spot. I knew that I couldn't park there legally, but the lane that I would have to turn down went in the opposite direction of the parking lot exit. And on a side note, I seriously don't know who designed this parking lot. But anyway, there was parking on the street, and even though it appeared to be limited, I needed to get to those spots. My only option was to pull into the handicap spot and turn that around. There had been an elderly couple behind me the whole time. And when I say behind me, I mean he was tailgating. I could see their faces and I can still see them. My windows were down because, I had a cheap car and the AC wasn't working. And the moment I started to turn into the spot, I heard yelling. The man in the car was just screaming at me, calling me names, telling me I was selfish. And he almost had me in tears. Once he stopped yelling, I told him that I had pulled in to turn around because I couldn't go onto the next lane because it didn't go in the direction I needed. That by turning around, I would be going down one of the few lanes that was big enough for two cars to pass. His face actually fell as he looked, at the lanes and the directions that they went and realized I was right. He had been leaning out of the window as he yelled, but he kind of slid back in and he looked like a little boy who had just been scolded. I kind of took a little bit of pleasure on that, I admit. But my heart was racing, though, when I did start to pull out of the spot. I did eventually get a spot on the street and I got my shopping done, but I was shaking because of a really tense confrontation based on an assumption that he made without evaluating the whole circumstance. Plus, at the time, I did have the disability, the problems with the lymphedema, but I didn't get my handicap tag until about 20 years later. So in this situation, though, if I did have a handicap placard, I would not have had it in my rearview mirror. And when I did hang it up, it would have become visible. While, I did not have a handicap placard then, I did have family members who had one and they didn't hang it in the rearview mirror. They would just put it up when they parked. I don't know about every state, but I know in mine it is technically illegal to drive with that in the rearview mirror or hanging from the rearview mirror. So, what if in this situation in college, I had the placard and hadn't put it up yet? This man would have misjudged me as well based solely on an assumption made without information. So no matter what, whether I was, or had the handicap placard and just hadn't put it up, or as it actually was, I just needed to turn around because there was literally no place left for me to go, he evaluated something that happened and did not take into account the actual facts. He just made that quick judgment. Now, looking back at it, I always struggled with getting a handicap placard. I really didn't want to get one, but now I think I finally realized why. That the image of this, it still pops into my head even more than 20 years later. It just sticks with me. And so the next story is something that looks at things completely opposite as what I've just gone over. So there was a story that I once heard about a man. He started a new job and he'd been searching for a while, so money was really, really tight. In his previous job, they really did manual labor, so his clothing was kind of worn. It was jeans, work boots, things like that. And the new job, though, it required business casual wear, but there were a lot of chances at promotion, and he really wanted to take that opportunity. But again, his wardrobe just had jeans with holes, dirty work boots, T-shirts, sweatshirts, and he was worried about wearing these clothes into work. He even called some of his male relatives, but a lot of them worked in similar jobs where they wore jeans and T-shirts, and they really didn't have anything to lend to him, or they might have been a different size. So he went into training. He tried to sit away from the instructor. He had a pretty decent overcoat that you wore when it was cold, even though it wasn't really that cold. But he wore it and kept it on to hide the T-shirt. But no matter what, the jeans and the shoes were visible. When the instructor was going over basic things and doing paperwork, he also mentioned the dress code. And this, young man could almost feel people, turning around to look at him. And, it really upset him, but he did what he had to do. And so the next day, he did the same thing. And a few minutes before lunch, the instructor sent an email and asked him to stay after class. Now, the instructor had noticed what the man had been wearing, and he had made it clear what the dress code was. So on the second day, the same man wore clothes that were not compliant with the dress code. And even though the initial reaction was to be upset that he wasn't listening, the instructor, tried to sit down and evaluate everything. He knew that, the prior year, his sister had actually started a new job, and it was a similar situation. She had stayed at home until all of her kids went into school full time. And so most of her clothes, were, jeans, sweats, things like that. And, she had a few different nice outfits, and she was able to borrow some from family members. And, after she got the first couple paychecks, she'd be able to, buy more and invest in her wardrobe. So he decided to talk to the man before he went any further and, discussed it with his boss about what they should do. So the young man waited. When lunch began, he just thought, this is over. He's waiting for the other shoe to drop. The instructor came by, sat down, asked him why he was wearing what he wore. And, he felt a little ashamed, but he told the instructor and, that he probably couldn't get new clothes until his second paycheck because he already needed to pay bills with the first one. So, the instructor just told him that he would see him after lunch ended. So the man was surprised but felt relieved. He wasn't really sure how long it would last, but he figured he'd at least have a few days of a paycheck. And at the end of the day, the instructor emailed him again and asked him to stay just for a few minutes. The young man, once again, felt anxious, but when he went up to the instructor after the day had ended, he handed him a piece of paper with an address, a name, and a phone number. The instructor explained that the address was to a secondhand shop, the name was the name of a pastor, and that pastor's phone number. He told the young man to call the pastor, set up a time to meet him at the shop, and the pastor would cover the cost of a few outfits through an outreach program that they had. You would get him, a few pair of pants, a few shirts, things that could really be interchanged, and also get him a pair of shoes. The only thing that, the pastor really asked was that if the young man were ever in a position to help someone in need, that he does so, that he remembers what was done for him. So I know I'm getting into a couple stories that are kind of long, don't really seem like they have to do with an illness. But in some ways, if I look at different aspects, it can be. So, going on about 6 years after this young man started his job, he had then become an instructor. When he first started, he had hoped to take some IT classes and work in that department. But after seeing what his instructor did, the way he asked questions and tried to understand him, he realized how important the instructors were to the company. That even though the instructors did not come face-to-face with customers, they had a big impact on how those customers were treated. And also, they had a big impact on any individual employee who was working directly with the customers. So what the instructor did was both teach, the systems, the computers, and company knowledge. But in this case, the instructor, even though he had a few moments of judging the young man, took a moment to think about different situations and decided not to make an immediate judgment without knowing the full story. So, I think that this story really means to say don't judge a book by its cover, or even that looks can be deceiving. In this situation, the event stayed with the young man for years, just like the incident with the handicap spot and what happened to me. But in this case, it was a positive experience. So through all of these circumstances, I want to evaluate the use of the term invisible. We many times can be judged by our appearance or actions. But if we're judged by this, that by definition means someone is looking at something visible. Are they interpreting us wrong? While not all of us may need a walker or a cane or other mobility devices, there might be other outward signs. We may not be able to keep up with everyone either physically, mentally, or both. And I think that the topic of focus and concentration is many times overlooked. There are some days that I really just wish I could have a big sign over my head that said, I'm in so much pain, but I really want to double over with something pressing against my stomach because it helps somehow with the pain. But I can't work with my head under my desk. So here I am to give you all I got, which happens to be about 40%. But I will give you all of my 40%. And it might be more logical to put it on a sign and put it outside my office, but I really don't know what people would have thought of that. Thoughts like this would go through my head so many days, sitting at my desk with a heating pad, and while I'm alone in the office, I'm sure the pain was visible on my face. I was usually quick at figuring out things, problems that might arise with a customer, but on these days, I was just in a fog and trying to get the immediate work done. But, when someone would come into my office, I'd put on a smile, my voice would change, and I would act great. But as time went by and the pain became more intense, I'm sure that the pain started to show on my face even when I was trying to have it not to. Standing up was a process for me. It took me twice as long to get to other rooms in the building, and I fell. I believe it was 3 times at work, and I don't even know how many times at home. I didn't even remember one incident. My husband had to remind me of the fall. And as a side note, my doctor said she wanted to cover all bases because of the number of falls and either wanted a CAT scan or MRI. I forget which one, but insurance denied the request, of course. Now, going back to one of the previous stories I had, how many of us do have handicap placards or tags and have been stared at by others? Maybe not all of us, but some of us might, and we're wondering what they're thinking. Or have you ever felt guilty because you use the handicap tag, and even though you may not have been having a really horrible day, you wondered if maybe you should have parked there or not, maybe let someone else have the spot. But remember, it does make it easier for you. While you may start out walking into the store, okay, by the time you got through the store, you may be struggling. Through most of my diagnosis, which spanned years and years, most aspects of my illness were invisible to the naked eye. Pain in my joints, gastrointestinal issues, breathing problems. But as the disease flared up, a rash appeared. I ran a high fever, and we figured out that my medication-resistant rosacea was actually a rash that is common among those with autoimmune or autoinflammatory diseases. So having the visibility of actually those few symptoms saved my life. Otherwise, I don't think anyone would have believed me for the 1,000th time. So now that many of my symptoms are under control, I rarely get a rash, and much of that rash is, in areas that are covered by clothes. So if the rash on my face does show up, especially in winter, most people assume that I've either been out in the cold or that I have a cold. Now, I feel like we need to change the way that some of our judgmental acquaintances, as I will phrase it, see the invisible, or as a better description, interpret the visible. The number of people who have an invisible or rare disease makes up a huge number, and our symptoms and actions reflect our illness. We can even look at the accommodations that we might routinely make at work, such as if you feel like you need to put up your legs because of swelling, because of pain, you'll put them up on a stool or chair. So, it's obvious that there's something there that's making you not feel well. Yet, my illness is still invisible. I think that depending on an individual's comfort level, we may be able to take these opportunities to change what someone thinks of as invisible. And as the title of this particular the title of this particular podcast says, teach them to see the invisible. It's there. People can observe it, but we have to be the ones to show others. I hope that I don't offend anybody in the way I'm interpreting invisible right now. But what I'm trying to point out is what others see when they look at us and make these judgments. By doing so, if we try to explain a little bit about our illness or what it means to have an invisible illness, we might find a way to make the visible parts of our illness seen. When people make judgments about us, when they point out things that they see as negative, what they're doing is they're actually finding a way to make the visible parts of our illness invisible. So, what I think I'm trying to say is okay, we have what most people consider to be an invisible illness, but in a lot of cases, there are things that are there that indicate there is a medical condition, but people that look at us don't interpret it that way. And they, in turn, take those things that are apparent to their eyes or to their ears, and they turn it around and pretty much negate it. They make it invisible. So, and as far as what we do, I know that most people, if you were to ask them, "Hey, how are you today?" What are they going to say? Most people will say, "Oh, I'm good," even though they're not. So, let's just take an example of, say, you're walking to a meeting in the building. Someone asks if you're okay, because it's taking you a little bit longer, but you say yes. Then the same person observes you a few times and, each time asks, are you okay? And so one time you explain that you have rheumatoid arthritis. And, they reply like with this look of understanding on their face, "Oh, but you look so great. You look, so healthy. Don't worry about it. It will pass." What this person has done is just made a visible aspect of your illness invisible. I know everyone has different comfort levels regarding discussing their health. Depending on your own feelings and how comfortable you are, you might want to take the time to explain that just because a person looks healthy by what's a conventional thought, there are so many people out there who look just fine, but this may take a great effort. During the pandemic, I really haven't done a lot in regarding, say, keeping up my hair coloring, wearing makeup, dressing up, all those things. Well, I needed, to dress up one day this past week, and when I got home, I decided to keep my, nicer shirt on and stay dressed up because it did make me feel better. It boosted my mood. So if someone, just looks nice, if they have makeup on, most people would say, "Oh, they look fine." But I was exhausted that day. I mean, when I got home, I actually tried to work on looking at things for the podcast, but I fell asleep with the laptop in my lap. So I couldn't find the exact memes or sayings, but these are things I remember. There was a meme one time that I saw something like, a woman was staring back and said, "Oh, I don't look sick today. It only took 5 layers of makeup." Or something that says, "Oh, but you act fine." Yes, I act fine. So many people with an invisible illness take measures so that they either look or act fine by, society's standards. So just as a summary all around, we can hear people saying things about us, but, saying things like, "But you don't look," or "You do look," and they think, again, that everything's fine. For some illnesses, not all, though, there are visible and tangible signs that we give out. And as such, if we're comfortable, and, again, I do recognize that, everybody has different levels of the comfort. If you've had the illness for a long time, then you may be more comfortable or less comfortable, depending on what your individual circumstances are. So, again, this is just my experience in discussing my illness. So, I just want to make it clear I understand that everybody has different, comfort levels. But if you, do ever feel that you're in a comfort level where you can openly discuss your illness, just try to educate people that, for one thing, to be open to us and what we're about to say, but then also just to explain about, not every illness has all of these visible signs, that some illnesses, you really either have to look hard to see, or in other cases, to see the illness, you just should not ignore what you are seeing. So while I would hope that most people would be open to, understanding a little bit more about different illnesses, I guess my own experiences have made me a little leery that um, it made me a little leery of some people, but I do know that there are some people who are open to this. So, I kind of might open the door a little bit in discussing it. And if they seem open, then, I will open up a little bit more. But if our illnesses remain invisible, we need to take the time that we need when those symptoms flare up, whether it's for a couple of days, weeks, or even months. Um, when we try to take time to recover, when we need to take time off work because we're in a flare up and we're hurting, I think that some people who really don't understand the illness, they think that we're at home, binging on Netflix or, off having fun somewhere. And at least from my experiences, a lot of people with an invisible or chronic illness can't even afford just to go off and be on vacation or be off work when they want to. They don't really want to. They have to. Because if they don't take the time to fully recover, then they'll just be out of work again. And that honestly has taken me a long time to understand. So, I know that some people will worry about judgments from your colleagues. I know I have a lot of times. I worry about if, I take time off work that they will think that, I'm just trying to get an extra day or two off of work when that was the furthest from the truth because, again, I didn't have the funds to do so just like that. I really had to be to the point where I knew if I didn't take 2 days off, I was going to end up, with an even worse flare up and be out for weeks. So, I'm hoping one day that people will recognize the visible aspects of our disease, from the pain to even the brain fog. So, what I want people to see, and sometimes I even have to tell myself this a lot, is we need to stop relegating the very real external aspects of our illness to what some may see as imaginary or just rated off as, oh, it's not that bad and you'll get better. I think that going forward, I'm going to try to start looking at all aspects of my illness that are visible as just that they are visible, and try to show others how to let go of what society or convention sees as healthy externally, and understand that approximately 10% of Americans have an invisible illness or disability. So that each day that you come in contact with people, there are extremely good odds that you will see at least one or more people that have an invisible illness. That 10% of the people they see are struggling to make it through the day on any given day, and that those 10% need to be recognized, understood, but not judged. So I know that this might be a little bit longer of an episode, especially since I didn't cover, any particular article like I usually do. But I've just been seeing this a lot or more and more recently, that it seems like things that people think of as invisible are not really invisible. They're there. Someone just has to either understand or be willing to, and kind of depending on the exact illness and, other factors. But there are just so many things that are there for people to see. So I want to thank you so much for tuning in today. I did have just a couple references, whether it's about terms or like right now with the 10%. So any of those I will put in the description of the podcast. But again, with this one, it was more of, what I've kind of garnered from reading and observing just things in life. That the understanding, even through some articles, seem to, take those things that are visible and kind of sweep them under the rug to some extent. And I really want to start looking at, what we see as invisible as really being there and make it visible. So I do hope that you enjoyed today's episode. I'm thinking about moving the podcast to an actual different host. Like, for example, right now it's on Red Circle, and so that's where any links would take you to if you're trying to listen directly online and not from an app. Um, if I do make any changes, I'll post it on my Facebook page. But, I just want to be able to, have the podcast more easily found if someone is looking for something about an invisible illness. So I think some other hosting sites might have more opportunity for that. Also, as I've mentioned a little bit before, I have started a separate podcast just to kind of keep my mind active. I'm learning about different things. The podcast is called Danger in Delaware, which can cover anything from true crime to natural disasters to industrial disasters, which is actually what the next episode will be about. Um, I actually found a lot of parallels in this upcoming episode to even having an invisible illness. I'll tell you a little bit more about that next week once I finish up that podcast, just to make sure I have all my facts right, because it is industrial and it's very interesting. But I'm not really good at a lot of technical things, so it's taken me a little longer to read and understand the articles. But again, I found a lot of things that I thought were interesting that I might just discuss near the end of this podcast next week. So thank you again, everyone. Have a great week, and I will talk to you next week. Bye-bye.